Imagine waking up, right? And before you even open your eyes, your heart is already just hammering against your ribs.
Yeah, that immediate spike of panic.
Exactly. Your brain is running through this like high-speed checklist of every single thing that could possibly go wrong today. But then, when you actually try to throw the covers off and put your feet on the floor, your limbs feel like they're filled with wet concrete.
Right. The cognitive engine is redlining at, 10,000 RPMs, but the physical chassis just flat out refuses to move.
It's just wild. And that brings us to the source material on the desk today. It's this really fascinating document titled Bridging the Gap Between Anxiety and Depression, and it details the clinical approach of a Georgia-based telehealth practice called Coping and Healing Counseling, or CHC for short.
Yeah, and CHC's model is really a perfect lens for what we're looking at today.
It really is. Because the mission for this deep dive is to dissect that exact contradiction we just talked about. We want to look at, how anxiety and depression actually interact, why treating just one of them often backfires completely, and how modern healthcare is evolving to fix this for you.
Because for the longest time, the historical approach to mental health was just entirely siloed.
Like completely separated.
Exactly. If a patient reported a racing mind, well, they got put in the anxiety bucket.
Hmm.
If they reported being exhausted all the time, they went into the depression bucket.
Mm-hmm.
But this text highlights a clinical reality that fundamentally changes things. These two conditions, they don't just happen at the same time. They actively feed off each other.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the text points out that these two are essentially roommates. And it describes this striking contrast, right? Where, some days your mind won't stop racing and other days feel way too heavy to even get out of bed.
Right. It's an exhausting cycle.
But I really want to go deeper into the why here. Because whether you're listening to try and understand your own mental health, or maybe trying to help a loved one, or you're just curious about how this all works without the heavy jargon, we need to know what's happening. How does high-frequency panic literally turn into low-frequency exhaustion?
Well, it comes down to how your nervous system manages threats. When you have anxiety, your brain perceives a danger even if one isn't actually there in the room.
Right.
So it signals your body to pump out cortisol and adrenaline. You're suddenly in full fight or flight mode.
Uh-huh.
But here's the thing. The human body was just not designed to sustain that mode for weeks or months at a time.
Oh, wow. So it's kind of like overclocking a computer processor. You force the machine to run at maximum capacity to handle all these perceived threats, but eventually the battery drains, right?
Yes.
The system overheats, and the computer just forcefully throttles its own performance so it doesn't literally catch on fire.
That is a highly accurate way to look at it, actually. The depressive state, the heavy limbs, the apathy, the not being able to get out of bed, is often the nervous system's blunt force mechanism to force you to power down.
Oh, man. So the depression is almost like a forced reboot.
Basically, yeah. The brain depletes its own dopamine and serotonin reserves, trying to manage that chronic, endless anxiety. And that leads to this profound neurochemical crash.
Which makes the central warning of our source material just make total sense. The text explicitly warns against the trap of treating just one condition.
Right, because if you do that, you're missing half the picture.
Exactly. It says treating only the anxiety or only the depression leaves you feeling like you are, quote, working hard and standing still at the same time.
What's fascinating here is how treating these intertwined conditions in isolation is just a recipe for total exhaustion. Because say you only treat the depression, right?
Okay.
Say you focus entirely on behavioral activation, forcing yourself to get up, socialize, push through the tiredness. Well, you might actually trigger the underlying anxiety.
Oh, because you're throwing that exhausted nervous system right back into the fire.
Precisely. And conversely, if you only treat the anxiety by focusing on heavy sedation or intense calming techniques, you can inadvertently deepen the depressive isolation. You're barely moving.
So treating just one of these conditions sounds a lot like pressing the gas pedal and the emergency brake at the exact same time. Like you're burning a ton of fuel, but you're going absolutely nowhere.
That's exactly it. You're caught in a loop. You treat the symptom, but you aggravate the roommate, so to speak.
Right.
And the text offers this really incredible validation for anyone caught in that loop. It states explicitly, you're not imagining it, and you're not alone.
I think for you listening, if you've ever felt like your treatment is just spinning its wheels, understanding that physiological seesaw is just huge. But it begs the question, right? How do we get the car out of neutral? If the biology is this intertwined, how do you actually intervene?
Well, the intervention requires shifting away from just managing symptoms. You have to move toward root cause behavioral mapping.
Okay, and what does that look like in practice?
The text points heavily toward evidence-based approaches, primarily cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT. But it's not just talking. It's combined with really targeted support around your sleep, your stress levels, and your daily rhythms.
Okay, I have to push back on that a little bit, though, because targeted support around sleep and stress sounds suspiciously like, I don't know, every single self-help podcast on the internet.
Sure, I hear that a lot.
Right. Like, why can't someone just go to the bookstore, buy a book on CBT, download a habit tracker app, optimize their sleep hygiene, and just bypass the professional entirely? Why does the text insist on needing a clinician?
Because reading about cognitive distortions in a paperback doesn't actually give you the ability to objectively identify them in your own subconscious while they're happening.
Huh.
The way I like to describe it, and the text touches on this need for outside perspective, is that you cannot read the label from inside the jar.
Oh, that's a great way to put it. You can't read the label from inside the jar. Give me an example of what you mean by that. Like, how does the professional actually see the label?
Okay, let's say you're skipping social events. You read a self-help book that says isolation feeds depression. So you decide your goal is to force yourself to go to a party.
Seems logical enough.
Right. So you go, but you feel completely miserable. You come home exhausted, and now you feel like a failure.
Yeah.
A licensed clinician using CBT doesn't just tell you to go to the party, they map the mechanism. They might discover that you're avoiding the party not because you're fundamentally depressed, but because your anxiety is terrified of having a panic attack in public.
Oh, wow. So the avoidance is actually an anxiety response masquerading as depressive isolation.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And if you try to bulldoze through an anxiety trigger using a depression-focused self-help trick, you're going to crash. The text emphasizes that only a licensed clinician can make the diagnosis required to understand what is actually driving those symptoms.
Right.
CBT isn't just, positive thinking. It is the systematic dismantling of those neurobiological loops we just talked about.
Which is exactly why the source material includes this really comforting directive. It says you don't have to make sense of it on your own, because trying to untangle a neurochemical loop using the exact same brain that's currently trapped in the loop, I mean, it's basically impossible.
It really is. And the text makes it clear that navigating this requires an expert guide.
Okay, so that brings us perfectly to the second half of this deep dive. Now that we've established why a professional diagnosis is totally non-negotiable here, let's look at how that care is actually delivered in the modern world.
Right. The logistics of it all.
Exactly. Because knowing you need a professional is step one, but finding one is usually where the whole system breaks down. So let's look at the coping and healing counseling model detailed in the source. Because CHC operates across all 159 counties in Georgia. But, and this is key, they don't have some massive brick-and-mortar hospital. They use a 100% telehealth AAA-compliant model.
And we should clarify, this isn't just one doctor taking Zoom calls from their living room.
Right, no.
The text outlines a really robust team. They have over 15 licensed therapists.
Yeah, and the source lists an absolute alphabet soup of credentials that I kind of want us to decode. Because honestly, I think most people don't know the difference. It says they employ LCSWs, LPCs, and LMFTs.
Yeah, those are very distinct licenses.
So if I'm the patient, why do I care what those letters mean? Doesn't a therapist just, sit in a chair and listen to me talk?
Well, no, those letters fundamentally dictate the lens through which they view your anxiety and depression. So an LCSW is a licensed clinical social worker. Their clinical training is heavily focused on systems.
Systems like what? Families?
Families, yes, but also bigger. They look at how your environment, your socioeconomic status, your community, and systemic pressures are manifesting as anxiety and depression. They're highly resource-focused.
Okay, so if my anxiety is rooted in, say, housing instability or trying to navigate a chronic medical illness, an LCSW is looking at the ecosystem around me, not just my internal thoughts.
Exactly. Now, an LPC is a licensed professional counselor. Their training is highly focused on the individual's internal, cognitive, and emotional processes.
Okay, so more internal.
Right. They are the mechanics of the mind, focusing heavily on things like the CBT we discussed earlier, restructuring your specific internal dialogue.
Got it. And the third one, the LMFT.
Licensed marriage and family therapist. And that doesn't mean they only see married couples. It means they view pathology through a relational lens.
Ah, okay.
So if your anxiety spikes only during conflict or your depression is tied to, generational family trauma, an LMFT approaches your treatment by mapping those relationship dynamics.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because the text notes that CHC offers individual therapy, couples counseling, family therapy, teen therapy for ages 13 and up, and life coaching. Plus, they treat trauma, PTSD, grief, and stress.
It's a massive spectrum of human experience.
It is. And if you're just a single therapist in a solo private practice, you can't effectively treat all of those things. You inevitably develop a bias toward the one methodology you know best.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
It's the classic, to a hammer, everything looks like a nail problem.
Yes. But by aggregating 15 plus professionals with all these different licenses into a single telehealth network, it's like, I mean, this isn't just a neighborhood clinic. It's a massive, specialized medical hub that fits entirely in your pocket.
That's a really good way to visualize it.
Does having a diverse, culturally competent team like this actually change the patient's ability to find that full picture we talked about earlier?
It changes everything.
Mhm.
Because having that diverse team means the care can truly be shaped around how the conditions interact for the individual patient, exactly as the text promises. If a patient's trauma requires a family systems approach, the intake coordinator doesn't just hand them a generic CBT workbook, they route them to the LMFT.
That makes so much sense. But I want to talk about the delivery mechanism itself for a second, the 100% telehealth model.
Okay, sure.
Because I hear telehealth, and part of me just naturally thinks, isn't that kind of a downgrade? Like, how can a therapist diagnose severe depression or complex PTSD through a webcam? Don't they miss all the body language?
It's a very valid concern. And, early in the telehealth transition a few years ago, a lot of clinicians worried about that exact thing.
Right.
But the clinical data over the last few years has revealed this highly counterintuitive phenomenon.
Mhm.
It's often called the confessional effect or the disinhibition effect.
Wait, meaning people are actually more honest when they're talking to a screen?
Yes. Think about the traditional therapy model. You have to take time off work, drive through traffic, sit in a sterile waiting room with total strangers.
Ugh, the waiting rooms are the worst.
Right. And then you have to sit on a couch in a room that belongs to an authority figure. That entire process elevates your cortisol. It spikes your anxiety before the session even begins.
That's so true. You're on their turf. You have all your armor on.
But with telehealth, the patient is on their own couch. They might be holding their own dog. They have their own cup of coffee. The reduction in environmental anxiety allows patients, particularly those dealing with trauma, to open up significantly faster.
Wow.
The webcam might miss a foot tapping under a desk, sure. But the psychological safety of being in your own environment often accelerates the actual therapeutic breakthrough.
Okay, so that makes the telehealth model not just like a matter of convenience, but an actual clinical tool for bypassing defensive barriers.
likely.
But let's look at the biggest barrier of all, which is the financial reality of therapy. Because all the culturally competent, evidence-based therapy in the world means literally nothing if people can't afford to access it.
Sadly, that is the reality for so many. The financial barrier is the main reason millions of people remain stuck in that exhausting anxiety-depression loop.
Historically, evidence-based, highly specialized care has basically been a luxury good. It's out-of-network, it's cash only, and it's wildly expensive. But the financial details provided in this text about CHC's model are honestly genuinely disruptive.
The numbers are really striking.
Yeah. For Medicaid patients, the text explicitly says the copay is $0. Not subsidized, not a sliding scale, just $0. And for commercial insurance, it lists that they accept Aetna, Cigna, BCBS, UHC, and Humana. The copays range from $10 to $40 a session.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you have to look at the economics of how a practice can actually sustain numbers like that. Because traditional brick-and-mortar clinics have massive overhead.
Oh, for sure. Commercial
Yeah.
leases, administrative staff, liability insurance.
Exactly. And those costs are ultimately passed down to the patient in the form of higher session fees, or it forces the clinic to refuse lower-paying insurances like Medicaid. But combining 100% telehealth across 159 counties effectively alters the unit economics of therapy. By eliminating the commercial real estate and streamlining the digital side, a practice like CHC radically reduces its overhead.
And instead of just keeping that as profit, they use the margin to accept Medicaid and keep those commercial copays between $10 and $40.
Which fundamentally reshapes community health outcomes. It effectively erases both geographical and financial borders to mental health care in Georgia.
So what does this all mean? When we look at this combination, you've got the accessibility, the cost, the phone number, which is 404-832-0102, and the website, ththerapy.com. Literally right at their fingertips, does this shift therapy from being a luxury to being a basic, accessible utility for the listener?
It really does. You are turning mental health care into something as accessible as turning on the tap water. When you remove the friction of a 2-hour drive from a rural county and the friction of a $200 out-of-pocket fee, you normalize the act of getting help. A teenager struggling with anxiety doesn't have to wait until it becomes a full-blown crisis to ask for a ride to Atlanta.
Right, they can just log into a portal from their bedroom.
Exactly. It provides an immediate on-ramp to getting unstuck.
That is just incredible. Okay, let's pull all of this together and recap the journey of this deep dive. For you listening, we started by untangling that exhausting knot of anxiety and depression, right? How an overworked, panic-driven nervous system eventually burns out its own chemistry, leading to a massive depressive crash.
And we explored the necessity of evidence-based CBT and getting a licensed diagnosis. Because trying to fix an overclocked computer by only looking at the fan or relying on generic self-help just leaves you stranded.
Yep. And finally, we examine how CHC's telehealth model is delivering this care across Georgia with just unprecedented accessibility, erasing geographic and financial borders, taking a specialized medical hub and placing it directly into the hands of anyone who needs it. And again, just as a quick reminder from the text, you can reach them at support@geekstherapy.com, visit cheekspace.therapy.com, or call their intake line at 404-832-0102.
Before we close today, I want to leave you with a final lingering question that builds entirely on everything we've talked about.
Okay, let's hear it.
The text notes that anxiety and depression require care shaped around how they actually interact for you. If these conditions are so uniquely interactive and individualized, how might our entire understanding of ourselves change when we stop trying to untangle them alone in the dark and instead map their unique interactions with a professional?
Oh, that is a fantastic thought to end on. What happens when you finally see the map? Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today. Keep asking questions, keep looking for the full picture, and remember, you do not have to make sense of it on your own. We'll catch you next time.